we will now take a look at how to connect to the firewall to eventually obtain GUI access to the system so we can start with other configuration. Now, this is something that is pretty much critical for every single case when you deploy the firewall for the first time. Depending on the appliance type, like physical versus a virtual firewall, an IP address on the device might be actually pre-configured, but it doesn't necessarily gonna fit your network, your management network, or basically a network that you want to use for management. So because of that, one of the first things that we will do when we take a firewall out of the box or when we install a virtual firewall is going to be specifying an IP address for administration. And this IP address is something that we will then use for connectivity with SSH, maybe Telnet, or even API. API is going to be the third method that we can use for a connection to the Palo Alto Networks Firewall. We've got console, we've got remote access with Telnet SSH, and we've got API, where API stands for Application Programming Interface, and is something that will be used by our scripts or applications to connect to the firewall. As I said in the beginning, the goal in our case is going to be to first and foremost configure an IP address on the management interface so we can then connect with a GUI or maybe SSH to access the command line in a remote fashion. The command syntax that we will use to set up a firewall for remote access, either command line or GUI based, is going to be set device config. And the first thing that we will want to specify here on the console, just through the console, is going to be to tell it what type of address assignment we want to use. Now, if we go for a DHCP, a DHCP-client option, this means that we want to use DHCP for address allocation. And in this case, we are pretty much done with the config. Versus if we select the static option, which is what I'm going to use, it means that we want to assign an IP address manually. In the second case, it also means that we will have to specify the address itself, which is what we will do with the aid of the other command, set device config system IP address. Okay, once we are done with that, we will say show interface management to quickly take a look at the results of the configuration. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. In our network, as you can tell, we will use the management interface of the firewall for administration, and I will be connecting from this Windows station 172.16.1.200. So this is the address of the Windows device that I will use to get to the firewall, open the GUI, use the GUI access. And then on the firewall itself, we will give it .10 on the management interface. So 172.16.1.10 is what we want to give this firewall to connect to it. Let's take a look at that. Let's just click on the firewall connect for the first time using the console connection. Admin, this is the default credentials, what you will use to access the firewall for the first time. Everything is lowercase here. Admin with a password of admin. Now notice that the firewall is going to ask you to change the password here, and I'm going to set a password to match what we have here, CyberPW exclamation mark. So I will just specify the old one and then put new password and confirm so we can access the CLI. Okay, so as I mentioned, we will now use the set device config system command, set device config system type to start. You guys don't forget to subscribe if you like our content. Thanks. But this is something that we will have to do from the configuration mode. So I will first and foremost say configure, and then set device config type, system type. I can either say DHCP client or static. I'm going to say static here, and then set device config system IP address 172.16.1.10. This is what I want to configure on the firewall. Then we will say what is the net mask. It is /24. So 255.255.255.0. And the last step is going to be to give it a default gateway. I'm going to say 172.16.1.254. We don't really have it. I don't need a default gateway because my Windows PC is directly connected here. So pretty much the only thing we need is the address and the net mask. With that in place, we will issue the show. Let's go down to the privileged mode, to the exec mode, and let's say show interface management. So first thing we want to take a look at here is going to be the status. We see that the interface is up. It says it doesn't know what's the address is, what's the net mask, because we haven't committed the configuration. So we need to go back to the configuration mode and say commit. Remember that PAN-OS, or just Palo Alto Networks Firewall operating system, is what it doesn't take your configuration changes immediately. In order for the configuration changes you make on the system, you have to install them, which is what is preferred with the commit command on the command line or for the commit button on the GUI. So once we commit and the process is complete, that means that the configuration got installed on the firewall and is now active. Okay, let's wait for this configuration to be installed. We are almost done. We are at 98%. We see that message commit was successful. So let's go down to the exec mode and say show interface management once again. And now we see the settings we configured here. The interface is up. And when I eventually connect, we will also see we can actually see some packets being received and transmitted right now. So the next step is going to be to go to my management station. I'm on Windows PC. This guy here, 172.16.1.200. And we will just try to connect to the firewall, HTTPS to 172.16.1.10. Go to advanced, proceed. The certificate problem is related to the fact that I don't trust the self-signed certificate of the firewall on this PC. You could fix this problem if you install the firewall certificate to the trusted certificate store of this Windows station. Okay, so put the right password, the new password that we configured when connecting for the first time. And let's see if we can connect to the system. Just in case you want to modify or just change some of the settings configured on the management interface, you still have that option to use the GUI to make those changes. Just go ahead and take a look at device setup interfaces and select the management port. Device setup on the left. Interfaces, let's switch the tab and just click on the management interface, and this is where you can see all the configuration that we defined for the command line. If you make the changes here, don't forget to commit the configurations so they take effect.